Today on the Effort Over Results podcast, our guest is Dr. Danny Brassell, an educator, author, TEDx speaker, and self-described Jim Carrey with a PhD. But don't let the humor fool you. Behind the energy is a mission to reignite passion, purpose, and joy in learning, leadership, and the life. We talk about why most people don't hate reading, they just haven't been given a reason to love it, and how that one belief has helped Danny transform over 3,000 audiences across the globe. We explore the difference between education and transformation, the problem with perfectionism, and why effort, not outcomes, is what actually shapes character. If you've ever burned out chasing results or felt like you've lost your spark, this conversation will help you get it back. Danny Brassell, welcome to the EOR podcast. Let's go. Dr. Danny Brassell, welcome to the EOR podcast. Super excited to have you here today. I'm going to throw something out at you immediately, and I want you to respond, and let's get the conversation rolling. So you've been quoted to say, not everyone loves reading, but everyone loves what reading can do for them. And you know, I haven't been a lifelong reader, full admission there, and only in the last year did I start to, I don't want to use the term force myself, but really sit down. It's almost like meditation. Like you have to do, 5 minutes a day and then 10 minutes. And I use my philosophy of effort over results in that I just wanted to start. And so every morning in the dark in the winter here in Canada, I'd get up a little bit earlier and I would read 10 minutes of a book. And eventually I found I was able to get over that hump. But let's go back to that message of, not everyone loves reading, but what reading can do for them. Let's explain that one first.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Quinn. I just
Yeah.
love your enthusiasm. I love your energy. And you're not alone. I grew up hating reading. My father was a librarian. I always hated the public library. It always smelt funny to me. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet. And there's always some freaky homeless guy who thinks he's a vampire hanging out by the bookshelves. And it wasn't until I started teaching in the inner city where I saw a lot of my students didn't have the advantages I had growing up. And I basically said, shame on me. I was very blessed. Both of my parents were in the home. We were poor, but we always had food on the table. And my parents always read in front of us kids, to us kids, and we had plenty of access to reading materials. And so it really became a passion of mine with kids and now even adults, where I find that schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, well, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach people why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go turn on the TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it because they love it. And the same thing with people like you, Quinn. I just find out, well, what are you interested in? Because the research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. Yeah. People who read more read better. And so I just commend you for getting the habit. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I completely disagree with that. You can do that all the time. We all are in charge of our own attitudes and the choices that we make. So kudos to you.
I think it has to do obviously with what you're reading as well. And I remember distinctly in school, both as a teacher and as a student, there were teachers that, for lack of a better term, forced you to read something. So they'd hand you, the book of the week or the month, and they'd say, okay, we're going to read this. Or there was teachers that said, I don't care what you bring to class to read. If it's a magazine on skateboarding or, a small novel or Encyclopedia Brown, now I'm dating myself, just bring something to read. And so I think there are those critical steps of giving the child or the person just in general the opportunity under no pressure to just find something that interests them first.
I love that you say that.
But then comes the trick, because now it's sitting in one spot. And I would suggest, and obviously you and I are around the same age, but so we didn't have a ton of TV when we were kids. We obviously didn't have social media and internet. How do you get today's generation to turn off the phone, to get away from the devices and actually sit down with a book? Are there any life hacks for that, Danny?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, Quinn, I completely empathize with you because I was the same way. I was in one of my high school English classes. The teacher made us read The Scarlet Letter. And
Yeah.
no offense to people who love Nathaniel Hawthorne. I'm sure it's a great book. But basically, the book is about Hester Prynne commits adultery and she's forced to wear an A on her chest. And I raised my hand in class and I said, can I wear a B on my chest? Because I'm so bored reading this book. And if the teacher just said, "Hey, read whatever you want," I would have been an avid reader. I mean, now, I mean, the happiest day of my life, besides my wedding day, was when I got my PhD. My wife's like, "Why are you so happy?" I'm like, "Because from now on, I pick the books."
Yep.
And I read voraciously now. It's because I'm reading things I'm interested in. It's such an easy strategy in terms of directly relating to your question. I'm a person that doesn't believe in fearing technology. I embrace technology. I think
Mm,
social media, internet, TV, they're here to stay.
yep.
And so I try to train parents on ways that they can embrace these types of technology. So, for example, my three children, when they were very young, I knew they were going to watch TV. And so I made the rule that the price of admission before they turn on the TV is they had to bring me something to read. So when they were little, they'd bring me picture books. I'd read the picture book to them and then they could watch their TV. Now they're all older. And so they'll bring me like a newspaper article or their iPad or something. We'll read that together. But we just turned it into a habit. Here's a habit for all parents out there. You know, I know you're in Canada, but President Bush Sr. in 1992 signed a very important law in America. And I'm pretty sure Canada has the same law. It says every single television set sold here has to have closed captioning. So one of the first strategies I share with people is turn on the closed captioning. They'll say, well, wait a sec. If the show is in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a fair point, but let me make a point. Have you ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at the subtitles? It's actually very difficult to do. Your brain is directed towards the text, and there's actual research that supports this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, the lower their reading scores are in every single country on the planet except for one. The country where kids watch the most TV also has the highest reading scores.
Wow.
It's Finland. And people always ask, well, how can that be? I'm like, well, because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they have to do is they have to import all these old American sitcoms like Happy Days and Good Times and Welcome Back, Kotter, and they're being subtitled in Finnish. The kids are reading constantly. So that's an easy strategy. When people talk about social media, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of social media, but people say kids aren't reading. I'm like, are you kidding me? I watch kids. Kids are reading more today than I've ever seen them. They are always on their phones. And people say, well, a lot of them are watching those videos. I'm like, but did you know 80% of the videos being watched on YouTube are without the sound? And so they're looking at subtitles on those as well. The average child today is confronted with more media in a single day than a person growing up in the 19th century saw their entire lifetime. So, and frankly, I try to train kids better habits on their phones. I'm like, you know, most of you are just wasting your time on social media, but if used properly, this is an incredible tool. And so I set reminders on my calendar all the time, and I'm always trying to learn different things. So, if, like, for example, I'm a bad Christian, I've been trying to learn different pieces of scripture. And so every day at 4:29 p.m., I've been reviewing Ephesians 29, which is do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful in building up others according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Good.
Mm,
I've got it. I think I'm pretty good there. I read the book Dune, and in Dune by Frank Herbert, there's a thing called the Litany Against Fear. And so every day at 9:11 in the morning, I go through the litany against fear, which is I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over and through me. And when the fear has passed, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. So I've been practicing that. I love the St. Crispian Day speech by Henry V, which is an Act 4, Scene 4. So I've been practicing that every day at 4:04. I go through, you know, that's the Band of Brothers speech, which I love. My wife and I got married on December 20th. So every day at 12:20, I have an alert to text my wife that I love her. So this can actually be a really useful tool. And again, I think it's the wrong strategy for people to fear technology. This is the same argument. I mean, the Greeks 3,000 years ago thought education was going to hell in a handbasket because what? You have to write it down to remember it? You can't just remember it, and then like in the 1840s, chalkboards were the technology. Oh, it's got to be on a chalkboard. This technology is going to destroy kids. And then it was movies, then it was radio, then it was TV, then it was the internet, social media. Now it's more AI. Oh, you can't even write anything. Actually, I think AI, I was just being interviewed, and I think AI is incredible. It's really changed our entire world because now the answers aren't as important as knowing which questions to ask. And I think that's actually the sign of progress in societies. Are you asking more clever questions? I get excited about this. So I just think when people try to fear technology, I'm like, no, embrace it. Let's figure out how to use it to our advantage.
Well, and I think it's how people, when we talk about children reading, it's how people perceive what reading is. And our generation sees reading as sitting in a corner and opening up a book, whereas the new generation, and I'll basically say, from Gen X through to millennials now to Gen Z, you're right, they are reading constantly. They're reading. In fact, it's become, I don't know if it's trendy or if it's just the norm, but Gen Z, every video they watch, they have the captions on.
Yep.
When you take a look at shorts, YouTube videos and everything, the captions are on. They're constantly reading that. They're reading the subtitles. They are reading. But my question to you, Danny, and going back to the technology question is this, is that, would you, as a promoter of reading and the beauty of reading, is it okay for a child to hold their phone and read, say, a classic, Catcher in the Rye, and once again, I'm dating myself now, but on a phone? Because for older generations, they like the tactile feel of holding a book and turning the page and marking the corner as to where they're reading. Are children and young people, or once again, anybody in general, still getting the same out of reading when they're reading it off a blue screen?
Yeah, that's a great question, Quinn, because we don't know. Actually, the research hasn't really supported one or the other. You know, when people ask me, Danny, regular books or ebooks, my answer is always yes. I mean, I think you and I are fairly. I'm old school. I like a physical book. I like to hold it and everything. Uh, my wife, she loves her Kindle, and there's three reasons why I always tell people I'm like, she's brilliant. I mean, first of all, she's from Singapore, and so every summer we fly to Singapore, and while I'm loading my bags with 20 books to read, she has a 1 pound Kindle that has access to the world's library. Second of all, we both like to read in bed, and it drives her crazy because I have to have my reading lamp on, whereas her Kindle illuminates itself. And then third, I'm getting older, and it's very difficult for me when I get like some cheap mystery novel I want to read on the beach because sometimes the font's really small. Well, she never faces that problem because on the Kindle you can adjust the font size. And so I think there's always pros and cons. One of the things I share with parents is the little boy who only reads Captain Underpants is going to become a better reader than the little boy who refuses to read anything. Captain Underpants is the gateway drug to Shakespeare, but we got to get the kid hooked first. The same thing with electronics versus traditional reading is I want to show the kids why reading is awesome. And then I can kind of slowly get them to reading more, different types of text. I mean, I love Catcher in the Rye. That was actually one of the first books to make me laugh out loud. I was like, wow, this book is really messed up. But again, it was Mark Twain who he was so happy when he finally finished school because he didn't have to read the classics anymore. The classics drive me nuts. It makes people snotty. And I'm like, again, who's to say that this text is written at a better level? I mean, you can actually, there's now on your Microsoft Word, it actually has a way to figure out the readability level. And I would argue you and I both have a passion for football. That's one thing I would have read about all the time in school. And if I had a good teacher, I did have one teacher that said, hey, Danny, here's a book on John Elway. Check out this book about John Elway. I'm like, oh, I read that cover to cover because I was interested, as opposed to, hey, Danny, let's read Little Women and Little House on the Prairie and Sarah Plain and Tall. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. I'll give a better example for our audience. For all of you who have that 500-page book on your bedside table that you started 3 years ago, I absolve you of that book. Get another one. Reading is like eating. If you take a bite of something like, that's nasty. Maybe it gets better. No, it's nasty. Put it down. Same thing with a book. If you don't like the first couple of chapters, you're probably not going to like the book. Put it down. There was over 4 million books written last year alone in English. Some of them are pretty good. Don't waste your time on the lame ones. And I love talking to somebody like you, Quinn, because we have similar interests, but we also have different things. And I'm always picking up, oh, what's he reading and what's he's interested in. And this is basically when I'm working with kids. When I was a second grade teacher, I had a boy, Kiara, and Kiara's first grade teacher told me, Kiara don't know nothing. I'm like, well, thank you for that. Well, Kiara, who don't know nothing, and I'm going to date myself, he comes into my classroom one day. He's like, hey, Mr. Brassell, you see Barkley last night? He had 18 points and 16 rebounds. I'm like, thank you, Kiara. Because from that day forward, every day after lunch, I'd sit Kiara on my lap. We'd read the LA Times sports page today. And guess what, Quinn? By the end of the year, best reader in my class. And all that kid ever read about was sports. Do I think other things are important? Yes, but it's my job to build the interest first, and then I can gradually show them different ways to read.
Okay, you just triggered a deep memory for me when you gave that last example, because I remember as a child in in the 1900s, in the 1970s, my grandfather reading the sports page to me. I'm sitting on his giant armchair, and the armchair arms were like that wide. And so I fit on the armchair like a bed almost. And he would read the sports page to me, and he read the articles. And I think when I look back, like I think about my 10 years in radio and doing pregame for the local pro team up here in Canada, and then being interested in radio when I went to university at Washington State. I was in the Edward R. Murrow School of Communications. I'm like, where did this love for broadcasting and journalism and sports? And then I go back and I'm like, well, my grandfather read me the sports page every day. And I even remember sitting down at my grandmother's Corona typewriter with the sports page propped up so I could see it. And I would actually type out the box scores and learn how to space and learn. And it's that experiential learning, things that we choose to do, and what we're exposed to, that really form us and shape us. And I want to go back to your time as a classroom teacher, because I was a high school teacher for 5 years myself. And I think it actually took me leaving teaching, Danny, to realize that I was doing it the wrong way. But when I go back to those aha teaching moments where the kids really clicked into what I was presenting, it was largely because I gave them the opportunity to choose their own way to learn. And I remember a few classes where, we took To Kill a Mockingbird, right? And I thought, okay, here we go again. Racism this, racism that. It's the same thing. Here are the unit questions. And I go, no, I'm not going to do this. And I had this idea. I go, all right, what's To Kill a Mockingbird about? And the kids are like, well, racism in the South. I'm like, yes, sure. What's the key theme? Racism. Great. If you had any amount of money, if money wasn't an object, how would you learn about racism? Where would you go? What would you do? And I told them, like, would you fly somewhere? Would you travel somewhere? And they came up with these brilliant ideas. And they came and I said, okay, now I need you to dial that back a bit and go, okay, what would you do here in this city? Because now you can do that. I had these kids going on their own time after school to the Jewish Cultural Center. I had them going to the First Nations Indigenous Center, where they promote that, and learning about racism against First Nations people in Canada, against Jews, across the world. I had one child basically take a virtual online course about Martin Luther King and what happened in Selma. I could ask them to do that. If I had told them, you're going to go do this, they would have been like, no, we're not. That's just, they would have pushed back. But that experiential learning is where true learning happens, is when the child or the adult chooses for themselves how they want to learn.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that's where reading comes in. It's being exposed to it, but not forced into it. And one of the reasons why I left teaching is because the curriculum and the way the education system is now, it still kind of pigeonholes teachers into doing the same stuff, overheads and questions and notes and things like that. And that's where I think the education system fails a little bit, not to their own fault. But let's go back to your time as a classroom teacher, I believe in inner city LA. Talk to us about that experience and how it formed you, not only as an educator, but as a promoter of reading, but ultimately as a public speaker. Because I know that my 5 years in front of kids in the high school classroom, but also then on the radio at Washington State when I was there, formed my public speaking style. So let's talk about your journey from teacher, educator, promoter, and now on to public speaking.
Yeah, so I was really blessed. I've lived, I feel like my autobiography should be titled Pivots because I've lived about 9 lives
Yep.
already.
Yep.
30 years ago, I was a reporter. I got to cover President Bush Sr. for the 1992 presidential election. I loved my job. I got to meet every editor of every major daily, and one editor offered me the city beat for $16,500 a year. And then a friend told me they were hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So, Quinn, I became an educator for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. And I've taught all age levels. I started off teaching high school history, and then they put me in middle school, and then upper elementary, and then lower elementary. So, pretty soon, instead of preparing kids for college, I was coming home with snot marks all over my pants from my little ones hugging me all day.
Yeah.
And what I learned is what works with a 12th grader does not necessarily work with a kindergartner. But what works with a kindergartner works with all age levels. I call it New York City because if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere because they have about
Yeah.
a 7 minute attention span. And I just fell in love. I love your insights as a teacher, the experiential learning. I completely agree with that, by the way. I've had so many, since I'm a dude, they always give me as many boys as possible because nobody wants to deal with the boys. And, when I taught kindergarten, my AM, I had 42 kids. My PM, I had 48. And since I was the dude, they gave me all boys. This is when I started drinking. But the kids are fascinating. And I always love it when I hear a teacher say to a kid they can't do something. A teacher said this to my daughter a couple of weeks ago. And I told my daughter, I'm like, when a person tells you you can't do something, what they're really saying is they can't do it. Don't
Mm.
let other people put their limitations on you. And this is the kind of message I give to kids all the time. I've had kids, they'll say, oh, this boy doesn't know anything about math. I'm like, really? Really? Ask him about the hockey game last night. I guarantee you, he'll be able to give you the score. He'll be able to give you the stats.
Yeah.
He knows a lot about math. He doesn't like your math. Um, and when you give him a, gosh, I just love your racism example. I'm like, yeah, that's the way you do it is get the kids, instead of giving the kids a 20-minute worksheet, let them build up their own website. And so instead of spending 20 minutes on some activity that the government's mandated, the kid's going to spend 100 hours of their own time. They're going to be fascinated. It's going to stick with them for life. That's the way you get a kid excited about learning. It bums me out. And I don't blame teachers for this because the teachers are always handed all this curriculum they're force fed to give. I was a little bit blessed teaching in the hood because I'm sitting here doing a math lesson. A kid raises his hand and said his dad was shot over the weekend.
Mm.
Well, I have a decision to make. Do I continue with the math lesson or do we stop and talk about that? Well,
Yeah.
we stopped and talked about it because I want to get to know the kids. I don't know if I had as much of an impact on the kids as they had on me. I loved every moment with the kids. I didn't like anything to do with government bureaucracy. That's why
Mm.
I left. And I think that's why a lot of teachers leave. When I was an administrator, my policy is you can teach however you want. As long as you're effective, you're never going to hear from me. Now, the
Yeah.
moment you're not effective, then you're going to hear from me. But I believe there's like, I mean, again, we're sports fans. It's fascinating to me how different coaches coach completely differently with a lot of success. Some are I think it's kind of an outdated model, but you have some of those coaches are the fear mongers and they yell and I think that's more of an outdated model. I like watching the coaches that figure out the players that they're handed and get them working together. I'm always
Mm.
watching that. I think that's a better lesson for all of us, but I'm always watching that. I mean, in terms of the reading, I love reading biographies more than anything. And I always tell people one of my favorite things about reading biographies is there's one common characteristic about most famous people. Most of them dropped out of school. What's that tell you about school? We're failing somehow. And again, I'm not criticizing. I believe in offering solutions. I'm like, maybe the solution is what you offered us. Is Quinn, maybe we need to find out, well, what are the kids interested in? And let's see how they would attack it. Let them become critical thinkers. I mean, when I was a history teacher, the first two things I always teach my classes is history books are usually written by the winners, kids.
Yep.
Every event in history has multiple points of view. And then the second thing I teach them is my job is to teach you how to think, not what to think.
Yep.
And if we can, this is really one of the things that bothers me about society now more than anything is people love to just brag and shout and it's all about me and my brand.
Yeah.
I'm like, why don't we try a little bit of humility? Why don't we listen to other point? You don't have to agree with a different. I always tell this to students. You don't have to agree with my point of view, but you're going to learn how to consider different points of view and respectfully disagree. You don't have to shout. I had a great second grade teacher. She told the nun, sister said, "Oh, Danny, if you're shouting, it means you're probably losing your argument."
Yeah. Yeah.
I learned that when I was 8 years old. I'm like, huh, that stuck with me for a long time. I'm like, I think she's right. Maybe we have to have a little bit more respect. So this is to me what education should be. Again, I've never understood. I was on a podcast in Nigeria the other day, and Nigeria used to be a British colony. And so it still has kind of a British education system. And they're still forcing kids to read Shakespeare and Charles Dickens and Jane Austen. And I'm not disparaging those authors, they're fantastic authors. But maybe you can get those kids more excited about reading if you introduce maybe Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. He's a Nigerian author. Like, find people that they can actually relate to. And I'm not saying you just that's it. But let's figure out what kids are in. My kids are always interested in. I have 3 kids of my own. All 3 of them. I have book dates with my kids and my wife, and so I have 4 different books going right now with my family. So my oldest daughter's into Game of Thrones, and so we're reading Fire and Ice by George R. Martin. I'm not thrilled by the language, but she's into it, so we read it. My son loves anything with the military, so we watch the movie Master and Commanders. Now we're reading Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien, which my gosh, Quinn, I have to get out my dictionary about 3 times per page because there's so many naval terms and it's written like in Middle English. It's crazy how little I know. And then my youngest daughter, for some reason, she likes literature. And so she just forced me to read The Great Gatsby to her. I hate that book, but reading it to her, at least I realized, oh, F. Scott Fitzgerald knew how to write a sentence. And then my wife and I are reading this series called The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower. It's this really nice series. Who would have ever thought I'd be interested in Elizabethan England, this woman with her 3 guy friends? It's actually a very sweet series, but this is how you get kids excited about reading. I'm always trying to introduce different things to them. And whether I'm teaching my little ones, my older ones, I read aloud to my kids every single day. And people think that's crazy. I'm like, are you kidding me? The very first book I always introduce to my kindergartners is The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. The very first book I introduced my high school seniors to is Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. And the reason I'm doing this is from day one, I want to show kids great stories have no grade level. You can enjoy kids' stories when you're an adult. You can enjoy listening to adult stories when you're a kid. There's a lot of great lessons there. I don't know. I get really excited. I miss that. I miss that. I don't miss bureaucracy. I'm sure you probably left for the same reason, Quinn. So,
Yeah. I had an administrator that told me that I wasn't Catholic enough to teach in his school, which certainly didn't help. So it
have your own
disillusioned me.
papal gown? You need a papal gown.
Apparently, yeah. Apparently, I just need to do a few more hundred of these, and we were good. I'm crossing my anyways, it's vocal or audio or visual. I had a guest on last week has built a program for kids between ages 7 and 13. It's online. It's actually provided to teachers grade 2 to 6, believe that would be, for kids to learn how to build a business and how to sell and how to market and how to use app platforms like Canva and things like that. And it's experiential because they're growing their own thing. And she said it's taking off like wildfire. But I asked her the question. It's Leah Koss. She's on buildabizkids.com. And I asked her, I said, education and the way we've educated kids really hasn't changed a lot in the last 100 years. It's moved an inch. And I asked her, I said, where do you see education going? Obviously with the advent of technology and everything, now it's going faster and we need to change. And you and I had the same experience. We were told what to teach for the most part. But I feel like, there's a lot of people out there that feel like education really needs to just be completely overhauled, right? Montessori has tried to do it. There's lots of programs around the world that try to change the way we teach kids and allow them to find their own learning and experiential learning. And that's all good. But for the most part, nothing has been en masse within the educational systems, at least not in North America that I've seen. So my question to you, Danny, is this. Both former educators, you and I didn't see a whole lot of change, but will the education system look different in 30 years? Because there's a lot of stakeholders, right? Every parent thinks they have an opinion on how education, how their kids should be taught. Every teacher has an opinion. Every administrator has an opinion. Everybody in the community seems to have an opinion. And that's why it doesn't change a lot, because there's too many stakeholders.
Yeah.
But do you believe education changes drastically in the next 30 years because we've sped up technology, because kids learn differently because of devices and so forth?
Yeah, that's a great question, Quinn. You got me thinking today. It'll change within the next 10 years. Bill Gates recently was interviewed and he thinks teachers will be obsolete by 2035. And if you watch, I watched the excellent series. Did you see Adolescence? British? Oh my
I
God.
started it, and yeah, it's
Holy
and
cow.
intriguing. Yeah,
Is
incredible.
one of the I mean, and I don't like negative things because I mean, for people that don't know, it's a 4-part series, I think on Netflix, British series by the guy from he was from one of those Guy Ritchie films,
Oh,
but
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
his it's phenomenal. It's 4 episodes about basically their 13-year-old has been accused of murder, and it's shot in real time in each episode. But there was a scene, I think it was in episode 2, where the police are interviewing students at the school, and almost every classroom, the teachers were showing videos. And I'm like, watch out. You keep on doing that. Nobody needs to hire a person every year if all they're going to do is press play for a
Mhm.
button. I think there's drastic differences, and I completely agree. We're doing a great job right now of preparing students to farm in Russia in the 19th century. We're not doing a very good job of helping build systems that prepare them for 21st and 22nd century
Right?
skills. I mean, why not encourage your students to create their own podcast? So this is
Yeah.
my son just dropped out of college, and my wife has been pushing him for 50 different things. And I finally got a chance to put in my 2 cents. And I told Sean, I said, why don't you start a podcast and interview people in different fields? And maybe one of those people will interest you enough that that's the field you want to pursue. Now, he didn't take my advice because I'm his father, but I thought that's actually a pretty cool. I would do that with my students right now is create a podcast. Because I always tell kids, I'm like, you're at a huge advantage right now. You don't realize it. You're young. Use your youth as your advantage. There's a lot of older, successful people that would be tickled to come on your podcast because of, oh, this is kind of neat. I mean, Tony Robbins, when he was a kid, interviewed Howard Cosell, the sports broadcaster, and it just set him on this path like, maybe I just have to ask. Yeah, I think we need drastic changes. I would do a complete overhaul to the education system. I think it's completely outdated. I mean,
Yep.
the standardized test, the amount of money we waste on standardized tests, all it shows you is a kid does a very good job or a very bad job at a standardized test. That doesn't
Yep.
tell you anything else about that kid.
Not
Now,
at all.
are there with high IQs that are incredible? Yes, but most of those people can't communicate with normal human beings. You know, I was told, and I've never confirmed this, but both President Bill Clinton and Johnny Cochran, O.J. Simpson's lead attorney, that you could meet them, say your name and say something about yourself, and they could run into you 20 years later and they'd remember. And I'm like, now that's a skill.
Yeah.
You have that skill, you're going to become powerful. I think, you know, and what I do is teaching people, speaking people like that's a soft skill. I'm like, it's funny. I'm finding more and more the soft skills are the ones that actually matter. Nobody's ever asked me to do geometry in anything I've ever done. And I'm not putting down geometry. I enjoy geometry. But here in America, we graduate kids with calculus, but they don't know how to balance a checkbook. And I'm not saying
Or
calculus is
make
a bad.
change for a $10 bill.
Absolutely. Or ask critical questions. I mean, people talk about fake news. I'm like, there's no such thing as fake news. There's people that depend on one news source. You should watch different news sources. And then there's this amazing device between your ears, and you should use it from time to time. And don't let others tell you how to think. You should ask lots of questions and
Yeah.
think for again, I think it's great to have diversity of opinion. I think that's what makes all of us stronger is when we're surrounded by people that think differently than us. I mean, if all of us were the same, COVID would have wiped us out, but we're different. And that's a good thing. And I think we need to chill out. Life's short. You know, we're on this rock for just a little bit. Hopefully, we can make it a little bit better than when we came onto it. And yeah, so I'm going all over the place. But the answer to your question is yes. I think schools. I think I think if they don't change, they will become extinct because I mean, here I am in education and I don't recommend to most people to go to a 4-year university. I'm like, why would you
Yep.
put yourself in debt
Yep.
for an opportunity not to be guaranteed a job when there's most of it, like we know this that I can never remember the name of it. Is it Parkinson's law or whatever, which is like every 18 months we're completely doubling the speed of technology. It's something like that. But
Yep.
it's been proven that things are I mean, look at AI. A couple of years ago, I was telling people were like, "Oh, can you use AI to put together a speech?" I'm like, "You can, but I'm safe because it doesn't understand humor, and I like to add humor to speeches." I'll tell you right now, Quinn, it's getting better at humor. I've been
Yeah.
noticing. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it is learning so quickly." So, yeah, if education doesn't change, they're going to be in a lot of trouble because I don't think you can justify the cost otherwise.
Well, think about this, Danny. Like 20, let's say 25 years ago at the turn of the century, and when things started to go online more, like the thought in the late 1990s, if you and or I, if we had told our parents, if we had told people, "Oh yeah, I'm doing an online course at Grand Canyon University,"
Mhm.
people that's basically the online equivalent of a community college in
Yeah.
their minds. Like they felt like, oh, okay, you can't get into a real university, so I guess you have to do an
Yeah.
online one. And it's like you got this piece of paper that said, GCU and whatever. But now, like literally, you were able to get your MBA online. You were able to get, most degrees online. And even if you don't want to get a degree, every Gen Z kid out there, or really, once again, any age, you can learn anything you want at any given time of the day. You don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars going to a 4 year. Now, don't get me wrong. There's certain vocations where it's like, okay, if you're going to become a doctor or an engineer, something that requires in class and a specific path, right? But my thought on education changed so much in the last 10 years. And I was a teacher, and I
Yeah.
thought I was teaching those kids to get prepared for university. And it took me leaving teaching to realize that I was totally not helping
Yeah.
probably 80% of my class, because most of them weren't going to university. A lot of them were going to end up in the trades, which now is phenomenal. And I look back and I go, man, I kind of failed these kids, and I feel so bad about it. And I would totally do it differently. But I kind of want to transition and segue into this. One of the last things I said to my classes on the final week that I taught, because I'd given my notice, I was leaving, I was going to go start my own business. I said to these kids, I go, look, if you're good with people and you communicate well, you're fine. If you have communication skills and you're good with people and you're just a good person in general, you will always have a job and you will always be gainfully employed if you choose to. And one student raised his hand, and he was a sort of a larger, more muscular football player. He was kind of known as the kid who wasn't real bright. Um, and he puts his hand up kind of sheepishly and goes, "Even me, Mr. Magnuson?" I go, "Anthony, I would hire you in a second. People love you, and you actually speak really well despite your grades." And his face just lit up because I almost like released him from this pain and pressure of the educational institution telling him and grading him that he wasn't smart or intellectual. And he went on to work for my company. I owned a trades company for 5 years, and he went on to work for my company, and now he's working for the government. And you talk about your journey and how you should it should be called pivots. Same thing with me. I went from going to university on a football scholarship, didn't get my degree, came out, played 5 years of professional football, left that going, what the heck do I do now? Went back, got my education degree, became a teacher for 5 years, realized that I love teaching, just not, like you said, the government bureaucracy and the administrative crap. So I left that to own my own company. After 5 years of that, I've been basically doing business coaching and advising for a government crown corporation here in Canada for 15 years. If you told me that was my path when I was 15 years old, I would have been like, I don't want that path. That's crazy. Like this, because our generation told us one career, one path, go to university, get a degree, get a job, get married, have kids, die, basically. Maybe not in that exact
Yeah.
order. And it was all about just communication skills and people skills. And I don't think they teach enough of that in the schools, and they don't promote that. And reading is part of that. Learning how to communicate comes from reading. And I know you profess that. I think we're preaching to the choir when we talk about how important reading to your children is when they're younger, no matter what the age, even if they're 10 months old. Put them in your lap and open up a book and read to them, and write through until they tell you they don't want to hear you read anymore. But this now transition to my question about speaking and going into keynote speaking, because I find keynote speaking exhilarating. I would pay to do it. I don't need to be paid, but I would pay to do it because I love doing it, and I find it easy. I don't know where it came from. I don't know where I developed this habit, or not habit, this skill, because I've had people come up to me after public speaking engagements and say, "You're completely different than you were in high school. You were really quiet in high school." I go, "Yeah, I don't know what happened either. It just happened." So talk to me about that aha moment that shifted you from classroom teacher education and now into keynote speaking. What was that moment, and what was your first speaking engagement like?
Well, it was out of necessity, Quinn, because in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything. And I could
Oh,
say,
geez.
woe is me, but I learned a lot. First of all, I learned my wife is an incredible human being. I put her through the ringer. She stuck right by me. She's amazing. Second of all, money's no longer my ultimate objective because I learned you can lose money just like that. Third, I try not to judge other people because if I was somebody who saw what I had done, I would have said, well, you deserve that. But now I realize if you don't know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to admit, but the more I read the Bible, I find I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And then fifth, I was facing bankruptcy. I didn't want to file for bankruptcy. And my accountant said, well, you have to make this much more money this year in order to avoid bankruptcy. So I started speaking on the side and I hit his number right on the number. Well, then the next year, Quinn, he gave me a much higher number
Yeah.
and I hit that number right on the number.
Can I
So I
stop
knew,
you there, Danny, for a second?
yeah.
Um, so how did that start though? Because it's like your accountant said, well, you need to make this number, and you decided, okay, well, I guess I'll do that public speaking. So what kind
Mhm.
of engagements were you doing? What were you speaking on, and who was hiring you to pay you enough for you to get out of that debt and not go bankrupt?
Yeah, so there was a local nonprofit that what they do is they build school libraries and then they would train parents on how to work one-on-one with kids on reading. And so I started doing those trainings. I'd get paid $500 for a 4-hour training. And then I was working at the university at that point. So the university would pay for me to speak at conferences. And at those conferences, people would watch and they would, I guess I didn't stink, and a lot of people would come up and ask me if I would speak at their school districts. And so I started building that. And then at one conference, two different speakers bureaus had headhunters in the audience, and they both offered me jobs. And so they both worked a little bit differently. So one speakers bureau, they would have me do a 1 day seminar. And so basically, the way that bureau worked, I got paid $700 a day. So every morning I'd wake up at 6 in the morning, go down to the conference room at 7, do my presentation from 8 to 3. We pack up, get on a plane, get to the next city about 8 p.m. that night and do the same thing. So I'd be like, Monday would be Seattle, Tuesday would be Salt Lake City, Wednesday would be St. Louis, Thursday would be Cincinnati, Friday would be Charlotte,
Wow.
home for the weekend. The other speakers bureau, they had 2 day conferences and they had 4 slots for breakout sessions plus a keynote. And they said, well, Danny, if you do keynotes, we can book you even more. And if you have a lot of breakouts, we can book you more. I'm like, well, that's great because I have 5 keynotes and 45 different breakout sessions. And they're like, oh, wow. So they started booking me. When
Yeah,
I didn't have
diversity
any.
is good. Yeah.
I had nothing. I had to build all these things. I just lied. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So I had to build 5 keynotes and 45 breakout sessions, and so I was able to do that. And then, after a couple of years, I started. I said, well, maybe I should start my own business. And so, basically, during one of the worst economic downturns, I was able to build a highly profitable speaking business, and then that attracted the attention. Um, my business partner now, he's from Broadway, so he's a name dropper. I'm not a name dropper. So basically, one of the top companies in America training speakers, they hired me, and that's where I met my now business partner, Coach Jimmy. And what they would do is they'd get about 50 business owners and entrepreneurs and executives in a room for 10,000. And for 2 days, we would show them how to create a good presentation. And it was gratifying at some extent, but I wasn't fully gratified because the problem I saw is that the people, they spent 2 days there, they got rah-rahed, they put together a speech, but then afterwards they weren't having much success. And this is the reason I left education. I have a very high standard for my students, and I cannot accept failure, and I will not let you fail. I will hold you accountable.
Hmm.
And any of my coaching clients will tell you that they still get notified from me every 3 months. I'm trying to find out where they're at because I want to help them out. And so a few years ago, Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson, Dave Ward, and I formed the Well Crafted Story Workshop. And I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer because my background is academia. Coach Jimmy was from Broadway, and Dave was an attorney and a social media specialist.
Okay.
Now we work with those same types of people, but we continue to work with you until you succeed. There's nothing fulfilling to me about just taking a person's check. I want to see you succeed, and I want you to be on the biggest stages and doing better. And it's interesting because we've worked with some very famous people in different fields, but most of the people we work with are entrepreneurs and business owners and executives who just want to get more clients and build up their influence. Some of them, they need to get more venture capital. Some of them, if we work with a pastor, how to increase the tithe the church is doing. If it's a politician, there's two types of speeches you give for politicians is based on their, how many votes can we get you and how much money can we raise for your campaign? Those are two very different speeches. And I love it. I resisted coaching for a long time because I have a high standard, but I find entrepreneurs and business owners and executives are highly motivated. They do the work. It's all the things that school wasn't, like our experiences in school. The reason a lot of kids are unmotivated in school is because of what you and I have been talking about. School force fed them a curriculum which might not apply to their lives, and they need to see, this is why I love sports. Sports is excellent. You're talking about that boy, the quarterback who didn't know if he could succeed or whatever. Of course he's going to succeed. He learned the most important skills. He learned to be a member of a team. He learned how to be a leader. And I'll tell you what, relationships are everything in life. And if you can learn to work with people that you don't necessarily agree with, but work towards a common goal, you can move mountains, really. And so that's where I get a lot of the gratification. So that's I'm not a very good soundbite guy. Long answer to your short question is I was working with the nonprofit at first, and it was interesting. And this is an important lesson for people out there. Both of those speakers bureaus were paying me $700 a day, and my local library asked if I would give a free presentation. I said, sure. They said, oh, we're going to have 500 people show up. Quinn, 4 people showed up. 2 of them were my realtors. The other 2 was a couple that didn't speak a word of English. And I'm a person who always believes in giving 110%. So I did as much in Spanish as I could, made it fun, interactive. We all laughed. Well, here's the lesson. The Hispanic woman was taking English classes at the Adult Literacy Center, and she recommended me to do a 45-minute keynote for $4,000, which was almost 6 times what I was making in my day rate. And that's when I learned, and this is to get everybody out there who wonder, oh, why should I go on that podcast? There's only 6 listeners. Doesn't matter how many. All that matters is who. If you only have 6 listeners and they end up to be, presidents and prime ministers, that's not a bad audience to have, and I've learned this lesson many times. So that's how
I
that's
believe
how
that. Sorry to cut you off there, Danny. What you just said, I came up with something a month ago, and I think I posted it to LinkedIn, and I basically just said every conversation is an opportunity. Every conversation. It doesn't have to be a podcast. It doesn't have to be with someone you even know. I've taken coffee meetings with people on LinkedIn who I've never met in my life, and they're just like, oh, you seem really interesting. Let's go have coffee. I'm like, sure. And some of the best conversations I've ever had are with people because they're strangers, but I'm curious, right? And I ask a lot of questions, and why I'm on a podcast too. But I just find that even if you're at a bus stop and you happen to strike up a conversation with the person on the bench next to you, you don't know where that conversation could lead. And this is something that I fear for kids these days, is that they don't know how to converse anymore. Like literally the courting stage of dating is all text messaging and images, still images. And they're not learning how to coordinate their thoughts in terms of, and from what I've heard from my daughter and son, who are both in their 20s now, they say, yeah, most of their friends give 1-word answers to start with. So how do we change that? Because it feels like this younger gen, and I don't want to sound like the old guy in the room, but it feels like the Gen Z and now Gen Alpha are losing the ability to have good, deep conversations. Is this something that they're not teaching in school? Is this something that is just a result of nonstop device use? What are your thoughts on that? And how do we get them to change that? How do we get kids to open up and converse and see every conversation as an opportunity?
Yeah, well, the first answer to your first question is yes. They aren't having much exposure. I mean, when you and I were kids, we'd get punished. My parents would say, go to your room. Now my punishment for my kids is come out to the living room. Yeah. They're all in their own bedrooms. It drives me crazy. And you're right. It's becoming a lost skill, being with actual human beings. And so I want to facilitate as much of that as possible, because if you I completely agree with what you were saying earlier, Quinn. If you can communicate, you're fine. You're in
Mm,
good shape. It doesn't matter what job you're ever going to do. Communication is key. I mean, some of the clients I work with, one of the first things I'm stressing to them is the riches are in the niches. Don't try and talk to everybody. Just stay in your lane. So like the example was when I first started speaking, I was speaking to teachers because I was a teacher, and I was speaking to parents, and then I expanded to like school administrators. And then I was in a mastermind, and one of the guys in my mastermind runs a very successful company, and he wanted me to train their sales force. And I'm like, Salesforce? I don't think I can do that. I have no experience in that. And he looked at me like I was an idiot. He's like, Danny, if you can get inner city teenage boys to read Shakespeare, I'm pretty sure you can motivate my sales force. And it was, I had to thank him for that. He expanded my mind. I'm like, oh, I never thought about that, but I guess that is. Yeah, sadly, I don't have an answer to the question on how do you
yeah.
solve that problem. We're losing a lot of those social things. I mean, fortunately, my son's in the Boy Scouts, but even the Boy Scouts, he's talking about his troop is getting smaller and smaller because people aren't going out camping and things like that. You look at like the service organizations like Rotary Club and Lions Club and Optimist Club, their memberships are dropping. You see conferences, especially since COVID, have had significant drop-offs of in-person events. A lot of people think, oh, Zoom can replace a conference. I'm like, I'm not going to put down Zoom. Zoom's an incredible device, but when I go to conferences, some of those best conversations are the ones in the hallway in between different sessions. Just, I love that you actually have coffee with people. I'm fascinated. I mean, one of the things I do, I'll give you a little nugget here, Quinn, is on LinkedIn. Most people don't realize that you can add audio messages on LinkedIn. And whenever people connect with me, I do a quick little audio message like, hey, thanks for connecting. You know, I believe that social media should actually be social, when that AI shouldn't be artificial intelligence. It should be authentic intelligence. And someone
Mm.
throwing on your court, let's be authentic. Let's get to actually know each other and figure out ways we can help one another out. But again, we're old at this point. Quinn, chop off my head and count the rings. I think a little bit older than most people, but yeah, it's disappointing. We don't have those social events anymore. And then people are different now. You're right. I mean, people cut me off on the road. I always think, would you have done that if you were just walking in front of me? Would you have just pushed me out of the way? Because that's what you just did in your car. And everybody's entitled, like, oh, I'm so important. And oh, I'm going to take out my phone and film a person if they do me an injustice. And everybody's so indignant all the time. I'm like, calm down. Life is short, man. Having coffee with a friend or this is why I'm here with you today. I'm like, this is
Yeah.
a nice conversation to have.
Well, and I think it comes down to the onus still is on the education system. And we go back to a little bit, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too far again, but the education system, remember that there was that old saying, it was like, well, when am I ever going to use this, right? Math, English, history. When am I ever going to use this? And it's kind of true. Like, when
Mm.
am I ever going to need to know the dates of, revolutionary wars in Russia? Or I mean, putting together a good argument, I think is good, but I don't know if writing it in an essay form is necessarily the best application for kids these days. But when it comes to communicating, I remember, in school, we had a day where you had to get up and give a, 3-minute presentation on something you had, it was your hobby or whatever. And for 99% of the kids in the class, terrified, including me at the time. But I still think that that's something you need to got to work into it as it being a practical life skill on the regular. There should be an entire unit on public speaking, if not a whole semester on public speaking for kids. But let me ask you that question for kids, adults, no matter what age in general. The fear of public speaking. It's in the top 3 of every, what are your greatest fears? Why do you think that is? One, because no one's ever really explained it other than the fact that you're kind of somewhat exposed to the world by getting up in front of an audience. But why
Mhm.
are people so afraid of public speaking? And because you coach people through this, what is the number one, I'm not going to use the term trick. What is the number one method you use to help people get past that fear? So why are people so afraid? How do we get over that fear?
So, in terms of why people are afraid, there's a number of different reasons. I mean, I like Jerry Seinfeld's line. He says, people's number one fear is public speaking. Number two is death. So, if you ever go to a funeral, more people would rather be in the coffin delivering the eulogy. I
Yep.
always thought that was great. I was speaking to some schools in India. I spoke to one school, got all the kids all fired up, and the kids come up to me afterwards, all excited, talking to me. And I look down, there's this little boy, he's like 6 years old, and he has tears in his eyes, and I notice he's missing his left arm, and he looks up and says, "How can I succeed?" And so I crouch down, I get to his eye level, and I say, when I was your age, I went to 18 different schools before I was 12 years old. Everybody called me stupid because I stuttered. And eventually I went to a school and there was a teacher who worked with me one-on-one, and she would sing things to me. And I found I could sing back without my stutter, kind of like the movie The King's Speech.
Yep.
And eventually I lost my stutter and I became a swan. But I looked at that boy in the eyes and I said, isn't it interesting that the little boy people used to make fun of because he couldn't speak right now gets paid ridiculous sums of money to travel the world to do what? And he gets the biggest grin on his face. He's like, speak. I'm like, don't let anybody ever tell you what you cannot do. So speaking was not a natural thing for me. The reason I had a stutter is because I would get so excited. I'd speak very quickly and I'd stumble over my words. Every now and then I still do that. Most of the people I work with are terrified of public speaking. And as far as giving them devices I mean, I worked with, I'm not going to give his name or his sport, but probably one of the most famous athletes on the planet. I got to work with him, who performed in front of hundreds of thousands of people live and millions of people on TV. And you put him on stage, and I thought he was going to pee his pants. And so with him, this was different than most of the people I work with because he's so famous. People don't really care that all he has to do is show up and tell some stories. So I said, you know what? Just look down at your feet and tell your stories. And he tells the stories now, and everybody loves it, and they love him. For most people, what I say is find the smiling person in the audience. Smile. When I see that one smiling person, I'll have a one-on-one conversation, and you'd be amazed. Even though you're only looking at that one person, most of your audience thinks that you're looking at them. Just focus on that one person. But I always tell people there are two ways you get better at public speaking. First of all, you got to watch lots of speakers. I watch 10 speakers a day. I watch pastors and televangelists and comedians and politicians. I watch them in front of big groups and in front of small groups. I watch them in front of men, in front of women. Here, I'll give you a ninja strategy. I watch a lot of televised award shows, and people ask me why. I'm like, well, because when the person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to connect with their audience. I want to see how they use their time. Now, most people waste their time. They get up there like, I want to thank God. I want to thank the Academy. It's stupid. Nobody's paying attention. But every now and then a person does something brilliant. So a few years ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Joe Walker who won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. Now, this is Hollywood, Quinn. The important people are in the front, the actors. And you can tell the camera's scanning the crowd. They're not paying attention. It's film editing. And Joe Walker's British. He gets on stage. He speaks very slowly and deliberately. He says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now the camera's scanning the crowd. You see people leaning in like, what's he talking about? He says, for example, yesterday I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing hysterically. He gets off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said he was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. 45 seconds. That's the power of communicating. So the first way to get better is to watch a lot of speakers. The second way to get better at speaking is I've had lots of wonderful mentors and coaches throughout my life. One of them was a guy named Jim Rohn. And Jim used to say, you can't
Jim
pay
Rohn?
Jim Rohn. He'd say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. Translation, you got to do the work. You got to practice, man. If you want to not be nervous, I mean, it's just like any skill in life. The way you build confidence is so I'll give you another example. So my youngest daughter is learning how to drive right now, and it's fun watching her because when she gets in the car, she adjusts all of her mirrors, she looks all around, she has her hands on the wheel, 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock. I promise you, Quinn, within a year, She'll be driving with one arm, putting on lipstick, eating a Big Mac at the
Yep.
same time. She'll feel completely confident. It's the same thing in speaking. The more you practice, I worked with a guy 3 years ago, Jason. Jason drove me nuts. Jason's 22 years old, and I told him exactly what I said. I said, hey, you got to go out there and speak. I'm like, even the smallest towns have Lions Club, Optimist Club, Rotary Club. There's schools, there's churches, synagogues, chambers of commerce. Oh, I don't know anybody. I can't get on stages, Danny. And then wah, wah, wah. I can't stand people like that. So
Yeah.
I told him, I'm like, all right, fine. Do you have a Facebook account? He's like, yeah. We're going on right now, Facebook Live. He gets all nervous. I'm like, we're going on Facebook Live right now. So he goes on. One woman from Ontario, Canada, accidentally watched him as he gave his 45-minute speech that we put together. And guess what, Quinn? He sucked. The next day, I wasn't there, but I made him go on Facebook Live again. He delivered it again. He sucked, but he didn't suck as bad as he did the day before. Here's why I give Jason as an example. Jason has done this every single day on Facebook Live for the last 3 years. He now has 6,000 people in his community, and last year he made almost 7 figures selling them different offers he had. And the reason I give him as an example isn't because of the money he made, which is great. I love that. The reason I give him as an example is he did the work. He's been so consistent. I don't even think I could be that consistent. He's done it every single day religiously. So the people that have the stage fright, again, I'm not training you to be a public speaker. I'm training you how to get more clients. And the way you get more clients is by building trust. The fastest way to building trust is by delivering an engaging presentation that touches people in their hearts so that they want to actually also work with you in the future.
Yeah. You said something about, he just day one sucked, day two sucked. Now, years later, he's been doing it every day and it's turned into something. And that's exactly what we preach here at Effort Over Results. The philosophy is you've just got to put in the work daily. Don't have any grand expectations. I mean, if you want to set a goal or an outcome that you can shoot towards, that's fine. But really it's set it and forget it. Because during that journey, if you're putting in the daily work and you're keeping your head on a swivel, as we say in football, to other opportunities, you may not end up in the place you wanted to be, but you may have ended up somewhere completely differently and even better. But you've got to be consistent and have the discipline to do that same thing every day. It's like if I decide I'm going to be in better shape or lose weight or whatever, it's like, okay, can you walk a block a day for 30 straight days? How about we just start there? And you never know where it's going to go. This is what it finally dawned on me about 3 to 4 years ago, just after the pandemic and during it, I guess, where it's like, you know what? We can't control results. We can't control outcomes. We can't control anything that is our goal set. All we can control is the input that we put into it, right? And that goes to your story about that young man who is like, I don't want to be on the Facebook Live. Just do it. It's the same thing with this podcast. It took me a year to finally record my first podcast because I was like, I need the right lighting and I need the right microphone and I don't think I'm ready quite yet. And I got to have the right guests. Just do it. You might suck. And you know what? Maybe it's good that nobody's watching that live broadcast because you do suck. But then eventually you end up with 4 people and then you end up with 10 and now you end up with 1,000 and now I'm at 20 plus episodes and 5,000 followers and all this and whatever. And it's like, I never imagined it would happen, but people don't get that it comes from daily discipline, consistent effort. And I'm not going to reread Atomic Habits for you, but basically that's what it is. So, but I want to dig one deeper into that question though, is maybe people don't want to become public speakers, but people have a fear of speaking, and we kind of covered why. You're exposed to the world. But are you basically saying, Danny, that the way to get past that fear is just to do it and to keep doing it until you don't have a fear anymore? It's like, I have a fear of spiders. Okay, I'm going to put myself in a room full of spiders until I don't have a fear anymore. Is that sort of the mentality there for people who just can't get over being in front of people and talking? It's just to literally lean into it and go through it.
Well, so you come from an athletic background. I mean, and you know the importance of coaches. Coaches don't let you off. They
Right.
stick on your back. And that's what, when we used to work for the big company, they weren't doing a good job of keeping people accountable. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I want to keep my people accountable. There's only one way I measure your success. I mean, if your audience loves you and gives you a standing ovation, that's great. But the only way I measure success is how many people in your audience are taking the next step with you. Now, the next step, it can be like an unpaid offer, like subscribe to my podcast or book a free phone call. It can be a paid offer, like buy my product or invest in my coaching program. But I'm only measuring success based on how many people are deciding to take that next step with you. And so our process that we take people through, this process works. It's a 5 C's process. That's what we call it. You know, there's 28 different companies out there. They'll have their own proprietary process. They call them something fancy. Same stuff in a different package. The 5 C's are clarity, connect, content, call to action, and close. So before you write a word of your presentation, you have to have clarity. And there's 2 questions you have to ask yourself. Those 2 questions are, who is your audience? Which we've already talked about. If you think your audience is everybody, your audience is nobody. The riches are in their niches. I worked with this woman, Kathy. She's amazing. So here's her niche. She makes saddles for professional polo players. And I looked at her, I'm like, how much money did you make like at that? And she's like, well, last year I made about $800,000. I'm like, I need to learn how to make saddles for professional polo players. It's unbelievable. So first of all, who's your niche? And so we already talked about it. My niche at the beginning was teachers. Like if you've worked in football, your niche would be football coaches or football players, parents of football players.
Yep.
And then the second question is, what is the problem that you solve? And the problem that I see most people have is they actually don't phrase their problem as a problem. And the reason that's a mistake is because you have to look at it from your audience's perspective. They don't care about your solution, they care about their problem. And so, for example, we were working with fitness instructors. And I said, well, what's the problem you solved? And they said, healthy living. I'm sorry to say, healthy living is a good thing. That's not a problem. Maybe obesity, avoiding obesity, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So you want to look into your audience. What's the problem? Because you want to think about what is it that's keeping them up at night. If it's an entrepreneur, is I'm not making enough money. I'm working too hard. I'm not spending time with my family. I don't even know if I'm making a difference. Well, if you can address those problems, then they'll be interested in your solution. But you have to phrase it as a problem. There's a great guy, Donald Miller, has a great company called Story Brand. I love Donald. He says that your job as a speaker is to be the guide and to portray your audience as the hero. They can do this. You're Yoda, everybody else is Luke Skywalker. You're Mr. Miyagi, everybody else is Daniel LaRusso, whatever. So before you create any kind of presentation, you need to ask, and these are important questions for entrepreneurs, whether you're speaking or not. I'll tell you right now, 95% of the people I work with cannot answer one or both of those questions in a succinct way. And what I tell them to do is what I just told you to do is I'm like, once you figure it out, I want you to get out your cell phone. I want you to program in every single day, review this 3 or 4 times a day so that when you're in an elevator with somebody asks you what you do, I'm like, well, I empower leaders to transform their personal experiences into powerful business stories that inspire action, drive growth, and create lasting impact. I've memorized that and practiced that so many times. It's like the Pledge of Allegiance or the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
You need to be able to do this in just casual conversation. And then we give the rest of the structure of the speech, which first of all, you got to connect with your audience. Then you got to teach them content that serves them. You have to have one clear call to action, and you have to have a powerful close. The reason I know that this works, Quinn, is I had to do it. When I was in India, I was just touring schools. And all of a sudden, this one principal, he opened up a door, and there's 5,000 kids in an auditorium. There's 20 newspapers and 5 TV stations. And he introduces me. He's like, now for the next hour, Dr. Brassell is going to teach us the 3 secrets to reading better. When nobody's told me I'm speaking, and I have no such speech for an hour. And I got 5,000 kids. I got live media right there. So fortunately, it was India, so I get to speak slower. So I look at the kids. I'm like, today I am going to teach you the 3 secrets to reading better. Who wants to learn the 3? And the kids are going wild. And in my head, I'm like, what the heck are the 3 secrets to reading better? And basically using the exact same structure I'm telling you about right now, I formulated in my head in 30 seconds a speech which I delivered, which was broadcast to 1.5 billion people that night, and now forms one of my companies using the formula. The formula works. It works with everybody. And the way you get over your stage fright is by practice, 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 and having a very clear structure and understanding why you're doing the things you. Most people, they'll give anecdotes and they don't understand. We were working with a guy named Richard, who's a very successful financial planner. And Richard used to start his presentation. He's like, "Oh, my name is Richard. I've been in the business for 30 years. I've made my clients over $1 billion. I worked with this famous person and this famous person." I said, "Richard, time out. What are the three most important elements of real estate? Location, location, location. It's all right to brag, but you're doing it in the wrong part of your presentation."
Yep.
Brene Brown says something which I think is wonderful. She talks about you should share your vulnerabilities from stage. And the way I say it is stop telling people about your successes, start telling them about your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you share your own failures, the more they're going to see themselves in you. And the more they see themselves in you, the more they start realizing, I can do this. And so we changed Richard's presentation. So now his opening, he talks about the very first financial client he ever got like 30 years ago. And it's just a hilarious story. He made so many mistakes. I have no idea why this person invested a dime with him, but this was the interesting feedback we got from him, Quinn. So the way he gets clients is twice a week. He has these seminars at steak restaurants. He gives 15 married couples free steak dinner, and they have to watch his 1 hour presentation. And he said he noticed that the husband usually always has his arms crossed, like, what's this guy trying to sell me? Now that he switched his story, now that same guy is patting his knee because he's laughing so hard. And he's gone from booking 6 of the 15 couples to a call to now he gets 12 out of 15 to booking that call. And that's what we're looking at is how do we, and I still want to get, I'm not going to be able to sleep until he gets 15 out of 15 is like, how do we get you better? Because, again, this is a guy that's not a speaker. Here, I'll give a strategy for you and your audience. This is the first thing I do with people. I want you to sit down in a chair later, comfortable chair with a pen and paper, libation of choice. And for an hour, I want you to just write down every story that's ever happened to you. And I don't mean the entire story, I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of Costco, the time dad spilt mustard on his tie at that fancy restaurant. You'll find in an hour, you can come up with about 500 little anecdotes like this. So that's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then I want you to think about what's this story really about? Oh, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. Oh, this is a story about love. And so on my computer, I literally have hundreds of files with tens of thousands of stories. So whenever I need my audience to do something, I have a story that coordinates with. I'll give you an example. So again, I have Kathy on my mind. So Kathy, by the way, whenever I give names, I've changed the name. So Kathy, she was having trouble with her call to action. And so I said, well, what do you want people to do? And she said, well, I want people to know that they can't do it on their own. I said, oh, so you need to hire an expert story. And she's like, yes, I need to hire an expert story. I'm like, okay, I'll give you an example. So now she closes. This is the close I would do. I'm like, I'll leave you with this. Many years ago, my wife and I, we had theater tickets. We were dressed to the nines, all excited. And as we were driving to the theater, we got a flat tire. My wife said, well, I'll call AAA. I'm like, you don't have to call AAA. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire. So I went to the back to the trunk and I opened up the trunk and I got out the spare tire and then I got the pumper thing and then I got the thing that's like an X that you're supposed to take out the nuts. And 27 minutes later, I had grease all over my hands. I was filthy. I look at my wife. She's shaking her head like I could have done so much better than this guy. And unbeknownst to me, she had called AAA and a tow truck shows up. And a 17-year-old punk hops out of the truck and in 3 minutes flat fixes the flat tire. I think there are times in life when all of us think we can do it on our own. But if we want to save time, we want to save money, and we want to save a whole lot of headache and embarrassment, you hire an expert. And so now what I'm doing is I'm using a story as a metaphor to demonstrate what I want my audience to do. And the brain is already triggered now. They're like, oh, I need to hire an expert. You and I know this. Like the best, most successful people in the world, they hire coaches. I mean, Tiger Woods, greatest
Yep.
golfer of all time. He has a putting coach. He has a driving coach. He has a psychology coach. Maybe he should have hired a relationship coach. But he understood the value of coaching. And that's what you're doing with this podcast is you don't even realize it maybe, is that you've created this forum now for now your tribe's grown into 5,000 people. And it's just nice for them to be able to sit back as they're driving on their way back from work and listen. Oh, wow. I love that story that Quinn shared about his struggles. And his guest did a good job of giving me a practical strategy that maybe I'll try that tomorrow. That's what we're doing. So this is what a good presentation does. And there's a reason, people say, Danny, what's your opinion in my speech? I'm like, you don't need my opinion. If you want your opinion, ask your Aunt Ethel. I give research-based reasons. There's a reason why we're putting this here because I can show you all the statistics on how much more of your audience you're going to convert. This is why, this is ultimately the only way. One of my mentors was a guy named Zig Ziglar, and Zig, towards the end of his career, he did a survey of all the people he'd helped, and he was fascinated because out of every 100 surveys that came back, only one of the surveys said, "Oh, your speech changed my life." The other 99 were your cassette tapes changed my life, your books changed my life, your DVD program. And the reason I'm saying that is you can help a person a little bit delivering a 45-minute keynote. You can help them a lot by getting them into your tribe where you can coach them continuously. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful for you, Quinn.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone who says, I've done a few public speaking engagements here and there, like maybe 3 or 4 this year, but they really enjoy it and they've gotten some pretty decent feedback and they want to turn this into something that is, they want to monetize themselves, right? They want to create some income generation from it. We talked about your story about how it started small, really just out of necessity. And then it kind of blossomed from there because you got put in the right opportunities in the right rooms and opportunities showed themselves. But today, obviously now with much more technology and more opportunity out there, what would you tell someone what's the first step there to start to build continue to build those speaking skills and now start to get on speaker bureaus and lists of people in demand for speaking?
Yeah. So again, you got to do the reps. So again, even the smallest towns have all kinds of service clubs
Yep.
and schools. And I would just push myself. Yeah. Are you going to speak for free? Yes. But even when I was speaking for free, I still have a letter of agreement. And so this is here. I'm going to give you a behind the scenes ninja strategy. So in my ninja agreement, agreement, I had a line that said, I will waive my speaking fee, which was zero at the time. I will waive my speaking fee in exchange for, and I had 10 items on a list. I want 3 video testimonials from people in your audience, or I want 5 written testimonials, or if you're filming, I want copy of that film, or like a Rotary Club. I'm like, I want to be able to write a monthly column in your newsletter for the next year. Things that don't cost them money that most people will agree to. This is a great way to build up, because when a person's looking for a speaker, first of all, they're going to need video of you. If you don't have video, you're looking unprofessional. People ask me, Danny, how do you become a $25,000 an hour speaker? I said, if you want to become a $25,000 an hour speaker, you need to look like a $25,000 an hour speaker. If you don't have a website, you're not a $25,000 an hour speaker. If you don't have YouTube channel, then you're not there yet. If you don't have video testimonials, you're not there yet. If you don't have a nice looking brochure, heck, you can get a brochure made on Upwork or Fiverr for like $80 that looks beautiful. You don't even have to print it out. Just make it available on your website so people have that. You need to look the part is very important. But if you're just starting out, this is what I would say. You got to get on stages, go on podcasts. I get on, ever since COVID, I made it a commitment that I was going to get on at least 20 podcasts a week. And you'd be amazed how many gigs I get because somebody heard me on a podcast anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Think beyond your little world too. That's the power of this. You can be in Canada, I can be in Colorado,
Right.
and this could be listened to by a person in Cambodia. See, I got 3 C's in there. It's my old teacher in me. It's got to be alliterative. But that's the power. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live. There's people out there watching. This is how you get more and more speaking engagements. Here's the important thing, though. So I teach people this on the content section of the presentation. I'm like, most people feel uncomfortable selling on stage. I'm like, here's the antidote. Stop selling. Start serving. I believe that your audience has given you their most precious resource, their time.
Yeah.
And whether they decide to do business with you or not, you have a responsibility to serve them. And so I call it the Home Depot. A Home Depot is a short-term solution and a long-term solution to their problems. So the Home Depot element is you can do it, we can help. So the you can do it is provide your audience with a short-term solution that it gives them a quick win. So I was working with a clinical depression specialist a few months ago, and I told her, I don't have a pen with me, but I said, oh, well, your audience, will they have pens? She said, yeah. I'm like, tell your audience, take the pen, bite onto your pen. Because when you bite into a pen, it actually triggers your brain to think you're smiling, and your brain actually produces the same number of endorphins as if you were smiling. So there's actually a strategy on how you can trick yourself into being happier. So that's a quick win for everybody.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down.
A long-term solution, so this is the we can help part of it, Home Depot. You can do this, but you need me to help you along. And so the problem that Jimmy and I identified with the speaking company we were working with before is, yes, they help people put together the presentation, but then after that 2-day seminar that they pay $10,000 to attend, they didn't know, how do I get on stages? They didn't know, well, I haven't practiced my speech yet. Maybe, we're working with a guy right now who attended a competitor's seminar for 2 days, and they did a great job, but he forgot where to put some of the elements. And all it took was us to watch his video for a half an hour to say, put this, if you switch it here and put this here, you'll increase your rate of return. And so he went from, just by making Jimmy likes to call himself a speech chiropractor because we know the tweaks to make. But just by making that one tweak, he went from booking 13% of his customers to phone calls to now it's like over 80%. And that's what we're looking for. Is I'm like, if you want opinions, go to other people. I'm looking at numbers. Let's look at your numbers. How do we move the needle? It's great if you move their hearts, but how do we move the needle? How do we get you more customers? Because if we can't get you more customers, you can't keep on doing it. Like you had shared with me, I love keynote speaking so much, I would do it for free. That's going to get really old after a while, Quinn.
Yeah.
And that's why, and there's nothing wrong with that. Speaking is a skill. It drives me nuts that people think that I'll speak for free for them just because anybody can speak. I'm like, really? We'll see. My wife, our toilet was broken, and so she asked me to fix the toilet, and I called the plumber, and she's like, "What? I asked you to fix the toilet." I'm like, "I did. I called a plumber. He fixed the toilet. If I had tried to do it, it would have taken forever. It would have been done incorrectly, and probably ultimately would have cost us a lot more money because I probably would have wound up just calling a plumber again."
Yeah.
So for those that are just starting out, you got to get on stages and don't go anywhere. I told you, I spoke for free at the library. I've spoken to so many, these service organizations, they all meet on Tuesday afternoons at the Holiday Inn for a free chicken lunch. And there's always 15 to 20 people, but you never know who the 15 to 20 people are. And you're getting the reps. So you're getting that practice. You're building up your confidence. And then every now and then somebody might book you.
There you go. There you go. It's about the effort, not the result, right? It's just getting out there and doing it, and not expecting perfection, not having any expectations or waiting for the perfect conditions. It's really just putting the effort in and let the results happen where they may. Let's do some rapid fire questions to finish up, Danny. Obviously a voracious reader. I went through your Instagram and I love all the great pictures of you holding a book reading. It's so funny because I saw a comedian once that she talked about the new house she'd built, and she goes, yes, and we have a library of all the books I plan to read. And it's funny because on either side of my fireplace we've got shelving, and I've got probably about 20 or 25 books up there, of which I think I've read 2, but it looks good and I look intellectual because they're the right titles. So what book changed your life is really, that's too grand a question, but what book maybe recently, or if you want to go to change your life, but what book really just hit you different and really just made a difference in your life?
Oh, there's lots of books.
Yeah.
We'll answer. People are going to say the Bible or something like that, which is great. Yeah. I'll give you 3 from different stages of my life. So as a kid, Where the Wild Things Are by Marie Sendak.
Yeah.
I love that book. It's still my favorite picture book. As a teenager, I read Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was the first book to get me laughing so hard I had to stop reading because it's a wonderfully written book
Yep.
and it's very short. And then one of my coaches was a guy named Jack Canfield, who's most famous for writing the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, but he has a great book called The Success Principles, which everybody, I mean, when I read that book, I told the coach I was working with at the time, I'm like, Jack has put a $25,000 coaching program into a $20 book. The teaching points are incredible. The stories are phenomenal. I would have paid $20 just for the suggested readings he gives at the end of the book. I'm like, I've decided I'm going to meet Jack by the end of the year. And I met him and got him as a coach. But The Success Principles is a fantastic book that, oh, and I guess one other in terms of ethical selling, because I'm a big believer in ethical sales as opposed to the snake oil salesman I see on a lot of stages. But the book Influence by Robert Cialdini is just phenomenal. And I wouldn't just limit it to salespeople because all of us are in sales in life. Even pastors are trying to get more ties and get more converts, and politicians are trying to get voters. Influence talks to you about ethical sales. And what I love is he starts with the premise, if it's not a win-win, you don't do it. That's my kind of person.
Second question of your 18 children, and by children I mean the books you've written. Is it 18 or are we at 19 now?
I'm up to 19 now, and I'm writing numbers 20 and 21 right now.
Wow. Okay. So let's say of the books that have been published and are out for consumption, and I call them children because I'm going to make you pick one. Which one, if you had to recommend one of your books for my audience to read, which one is it?
Well, so when I was a middle school teacher, I was the only teacher that none of my students were ever tardy because I always started class by reading a Paul Harvey story. I don't know if you remember Paul Harvey.
Very much so. My grandfather, every day when he picked me up from school, we'd listen to Paul Harvey.
Oh, yeah. Every day I'd listen to Paul. He'd say, I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. You know, my kids love his stories because for 5 minutes, you're trying to guess who's he talking about or what's the company. But the problem with Paul Harvey is he's talking about like Fred Astaire or Sears and Roebuck, which kids today don't know about. And so I wrote the book Leadership Begins with Motivation as a homage to Paul Harvey. And these stories are updated with like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. But after I wrote the book, I read it, Quinn, and completely unintentionally, so many of my examples were of white male Americans. And so the book I'm going to push is my latest, Misfits and Crackpots. And most of the stories in this are about women, minorities, and international people. Because I just think, and I had so much fun writing it because there's so many stories of people throughout the world that I think everybody needs to know about. Inspirational stories.
Yeah. Worst advice you ever got?
Worst advice I ever got was, well, probably the worst advice is to shut up, Danny, just do what you're told. I'm just not that guy. I'm not a rule follower yeah, the best advice I got, one of my mentors was Jim Trelease, who wrote the Read Aloud Handbook. And after a speech, I forgot about the 500 people that loved the speech and focused on the 2 that hated my speech. And he told me, he's like, Danny, 5% of your audience, they hate you. And they hated you before you ever got on stage. Yep. And that was really good advice. It's, you know, J.K. Rowling said, don't let the muggles get you down. And so I try to focus on the positives. And, you know, there's always somebody that's going to be griping about something.
Danny Brassell, I'll tell you what, I could have talked education for another hour with you. I could talk public speaking for another hour. I think there's probably we could talk sports and really, really connect on many different levels. I appreciate you being here today. You have an extremely busy schedule. So to take, you know, nearly 2 hours out of your time to come and be here with us and to bring your expertise and your insight and just kind of that worldly advice that I think just helps everybody. You're not trying to sell us on anything. I think you're just trying to provide information and advice that people can walk away with. And that's really what we try to do here at Effort Over Results. We're not trying to tell people what to do. We're providing them with guidance and information. Let them choose to do what they want to do, right? So I really appreciate you being here. Where can people find you? Let's promote your socials. Let's promote what you want to promote and get the name out there.
Well, here, I'll give you, this is a very important strategy. And so this will serve you well, Quinn, because the biggest mistake most people make in their presentations is they have multiple calls to action, which confuse the audience. I always tell people choices confuse and cause you to lose. So I was on a podcast earlier today and the hostess, she said, make sure you like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review. And I said to her afterwards, I'm like, you just gave your audience 3 calls to action. they're not going to do any of them. And so I'm going to give you one call to action. The call to action is a thank you to you, Quinn, and to your audience for listening to me. If you go to freestoryguide.com, again, freestoryguide, like a tour guide.com, I'm going to give everybody their own well-crafted story blueprint. What this is the actual process that Coach Jimmy and I take our clients through on how to create a well-crafted presentation. What this does for you is it takes the guesswork out of putting together a presentation and shows you strategically why to put these stories and these cues in different parts of your presentation. And what this means for you is the peace of mind that you're going to attract more clients and, more importantly, have a much more significant impact on your audience. You can get that at freestoryguide.com. And I am more than happy to come back whenever you want me, Quinn. I absolutely love everything that you're doing. You're serving a very important tribe, and I hope you do it for a long time, my friend.
Well, I appreciate it, Danny. And I love what you said just now about, like, don't give people too many things to think about or too many CTAs, calls to action. Give them the one and let them go do that and then find you from there. So once again, Danny, thank you for being here today on the EOR podcast. Hope you enjoyed your time here.
Thank you. God bless.